Welcome to episode 36 of the Going for Broke Outdoors podcast, a podcast by an outdoorsman for other outdoorsmen. I'm your host, Jeremy Gillespie. On today's episode, I welcome Chad Donahue to the show. Chad is an award-winning taxidermist with over 30 years of experience. In this episode, Chad and I discussed the qualities to look for in a reputable taxidermist, reasonable turnaround times, caring for deer capes, velvet antlers, selecting the best mannequin form for your trophy, and a whole lot more. I want to mention that I have a new heavy metal themed design available in t-shirt or hoodies. I'll put a link in the description if you want to pick one up and help support this channel. Lastly, I want to thank everyone listening for the continued support. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube or your favorite audio platform. And finally, I want to give a shout out to Uncle Lou at Stealth Outdoors for helping to make this podcast possible. Check out Stealth Outdoors at www.stealthoutdoors.com. Stealth Outdoors just released a new jacket and shirt in their innovative smoke camo just in time for the 2023 season. While you're visiting Stealth Outdoors, don't forget to pick up some climbing stick wraps, cam buckle covers, platform cable wraps, or stealth strip rolls for all of your miscellaneous silencing needs this season. Stealth your mobile hunting setup by visiting www.stealthoutdoors.com to silence your gear and place an order today. And now, on to the podcast. All right, on today's show, I got Chad Donahue. Chad, I imagine no one in my audience is probably familiar with you. I normally have hunters on, so give us a 5-minute introduction. Who are you? What do you do? And how, when, and why did you first get into taxidermy?
Well, thanks for having me, Jeremy. I really appreciate it. I've been looking forward to talking to you, and it's cool to see you face to face on the screen. So,
yeah, thanks for joining.
My name's Chad Donahue. What's that?
I said, yeah, thanks for joining.
My name's Chad Donahue. I'm a taxidermist way out east in Michigan. I'm not a full-time taxidermist right now. I'm also a school teacher, bird hunter, dad, kind of jack of all trades at this point in my life. And got into taxidermy. I think I was in high school still. Was really interested in it. My mother really never liked me getting into all the animals that we did. And my brother and I, we would, we'd skin anything and or cutting wings off of birds and just like trying to preserve things even when we were young. And it just kind of progressed from there. And started the idea of having a business shortly out of high school when I was still in college, and just started to learn the trade. And now I'm, it's, probably almost 35 years later and still doing it. And it's still what I love. It's still a great challenge. And I love that part of it. I love the challenge of it. And I love the artisticness of it.
Yeah, and you are a great artist. So Chad has done, I think, only this deer mount here for me, but he's going to be my full-time taxidermist going forward, and kind of what I want to get to next. So in my circle of friends, it's pretty well known that I've had my share of problems with shady taxidermist, and haven't been involved in the business as long as you have 35 years. I'd like to hear from you. What are some qualities you think make a good taxidermist? And what about qualities, like if I'm a guy going to a taxidermist for the first time, what are some red flags?
I think probably one of the first things, considering some of the stories, is to be honest. Probably, I think that would probably be a good place to start. You're looking for a person that is going to be honest with you and with what they can do, and honest with you with your with whatever it is that you're bringing them. Too often we hear about guys that packed up and left, or they get their animal back and it wasn't the animal that they originally brought. And those are pretty sad stories. I know you and I have talked about it a lot of times. Especially today, taxidermy is not cheap. And man, for the amount of money that a person's going to put towards a mount, our goal is, I just want to make sure that we're giving somebody back a great memory and a great piece of workmanship that they can be proud of. there just can't be anything worse than being so excited about that bear or deer or a duck or whatever, and then getting it back and having it look like it got drug under a car or who knows what happened to it. And you're all excited to show your buddies, and then, you're almost embarrassed to show your buddies. And you still spent the money, but you got a piece of art or a memory that's been harmed a little bit, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons I'm so happy that you're doing my work now is because it comes through just talking to you. You send me pictures when you're working on my pieces, which is awesome. The communication's great, and it's been a totally different experience all around than what I've dealt with before. And you're right, it is a lot of money, but I feel like when you're getting that level of customer service and stuff, and such a high quality finished product, it's something you're going to look at for a lifetime. Then that's maybe one of the first points I'll make is just don't go to the cheapest guy, right? Because sometimes, not always, it's just like everything, but often you get what you pay for. And there's a reason that quality guys that are real artists are charging more, because they're spending the time on it. And they're good artists. They're not just an assembly line. So it makes a big difference.
I saw it was like a meme one time. It was a mechanic meme, but it was saying something like, that 5-minute problem that you had is like one broken bolt away from being a 2-day project. And I think that's true with taxidermists too. There's a lot of work that goes into those things, and it takes time to be able to do it right.
Yeah, and it takes time. Well, the mechanic's a great example too, because you're developing a skill set over time, right? So I imagine every piece of work that you've worked on, or a lot of them, you've learned something new every time, and those are lessons you carry forward into new pieces, and it shows. The experience shows, and it's hard to replace experience.
Yeah, no, I'm a teacher, so it probably goes without saying, I'm addicted to learning. I want to learn new stuff every day. My students teach me new things every day. And in the shop here, I'm learning stuff every day too. Every state has its state association for taxidermists. And I know you were asking in the beginning, like, where would be a good place to start for looking for a taxidermist? And that would be that if it was me, that's where I would start, because anybody that's a member of that is already saying that they're interested in learning more. Any state organization is going to have meetings throughout the year. They always mix those meetings with little workshops and opportunities to learn. You're going to have a state competition in every state, and those are, it's not just competition. Those are opportunities to learn. And so I know we haven't been able to compete in the last bunch of years, because it's really difficult to compete when you're teaching and to be away like that. But when we used to compete before I started teaching, like, that was the best part about it. You've got the best people in the world critiquing your work, and it's not just that you're competing and trying to beat someone. You're also there trying to learn. And that was my favorite part, is you're just like a sponge. You can just absorb all that knowledge from other people, and make those connections. And even here locally, we don't have any animosity towards other taxidermists around. There's a bunch of them that are near me, and I enjoy picking up anything I can learn from them too. I'll learn anything from anybody I can.
Yeah, I have the same approach. That's part of the reason I like doing the podcast. I joke around and say it's just an excuse for me to call all these great hunters and pick their brains, and then take something away, hopefully for myself. So kind of a selfish endeavor, but it's great to be able to share that with other people that are interested in learning too. So it's a real good platform.
Yeah, I love it too.
Well, let's talk about something that I know there's not a one size fits all answer, and that's turnaround time. So talk to me about turnaround time for quality work. I know that's going to vary by the shop and the number of employees, but talk to me. What do you think's reasonable? And maybe put that in the context of post-COVID, where I know some things are slowing down, some supplies are harder to get. And then maybe talk a little bit about the overall process, and just using a deer example, like going to the tannery, ordering the form, just kind of give an overview of the process and a reasonable turnaround time.
Yeah, the turnaround time is going to vary. I'm a little different because we're only, I'm teaching full time, and we're only taking a limited amount per year. And so I know about how many hours I've got to devote to taxidermy during the summer when I'm off and over breaks and stuff like that. So we limit what we take. Our goal is to make sure that everybody's got their stuff back in a year. But even when we did it full time, that was a pretty reasonable achievement, I think. And I think most modern places now are probably in that ballpark somewhere. You hear horror stories about, taking 4 years, 5 years, stuff like that. That seems like, to me, that would be kind of a long time. For me, it would be a long time because it would be hard to run a business like that. Our costs, we're just like everybody else, like a mechanic, like you said, a mechanic or a builder or any of those folks. We've got materials we got to build or buy, and the prices of those materials are changing all of the time. And so if I were to take in a deer today that doesn't get completed until 5 years from now, whatever price I quoted that guy today, 5 years from now, it's going to have to be higher. Nothing's getting cheaper. It would be really hard to have a successful business model that way. A year and a half out, something like that. I think that's a little easier for us to predict, but it's always a challenge for us to do that. Time involved when they come, a lot of people are surprised. I know you talked about, like, I send pictures when we're working on it, and I love that because I like to text you, for you, it's like 4 a.m. or whatever, but
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, we're starting on your stuff. And a lot of people, I'll send pictures throughout the day so you can see, and I enjoy sharing that with the folks that we work for. And you can see how it goes. And a lot of guys comment that it's a lot faster than they thought. But mostly what taxidermy is you're just waiting your turn. The taxidermist isn't, it doesn't take months or years for them to work on your stuff. It takes months or a year to get your stuff back and get all the materials ready. And the number one challenge of that is the tannery. The tannery is going to take, if it's a good tannery, you're looking at 6 to 8 months probably for a return time for a deer. So for a taxidermist, like, we're getting ready to send our first stuff out next week, the first load to the tannery. And I won't see that stuff now until, it'll be April, probably April or May, before it'll even be here where we can do anything to us. That's a long wait to get that. And that takes a lot of time to do that. As far as the deer go, I think most guys are doing probably a couple a day anyways, depending on what their setup is. And once it gets here and the form's here and it's all tanned and you can get going, then it goes pretty quickly then.
Yeah. So talk about maybe, and I'm familiar with it because I have a friend that does it, and now talking to you, you've been, like I said, real good at communicating. Talk about maybe the assembly where, you're putting the paste on, you're putting the hide on, the eyes, and then you got to let it dry down for a while, and then you do the finish work, right? Like, you got to have a break in there too, right? That takes a little while.
Yeah, it's nice to have things dry. Like, I don't know if you want to start like right at the beginning, coming in raw.
Sure.
That's probably where most of the challenges are. And that's when we talked about being honest in the beginning. I think that's a good spot. I can't remember with you specifically, but we have a mutual friend that likes to shoot giant holes in things. And sometimes, like, I just have to say, like, man, I don't think this is worth the money. Like, this is a huge gaping hole. It's almost cut in two, or, something like that. So, this might not be the one unless it really means a lot to you to, you know, to do it. Like, ultimately, when we're done, I want it to be something that you're really proud of. And if it's something that's looking a little Frankensteinish, or there's something in there to distract from what the animal would have looked like alive, I think it's good for, to get some actual feedback that's honest about this is good or it's not, or maybe your hide slipping, it was too warm, and the hair's coming out and we're not going to be able to do anything with this. Maybe we can do something else. I think that kind of feedback is important to prevent some disappointment or, unfortunate misunderstandings later on. But when those deer come in, we've got to get them all apart. And it's interesting. I'm teaching anatomy right now at school. My students work on preserved cats, and so this week they've been skinning cats, and it's interesting to watch because I can see some of the things that they do that I just want to jump right in and help them. But I have to kind of let them work through it. But I can see the same mistakes that they make with their cat that a lot of the guys will with their capes when they're bringing them in. They cut the ears off too far out. They cut big holes in the eyes or in the tear duct area. They cut the nose too soon or don't give a lip or something like that. So, for any of the guys that are, maybe never had anything done, a great thing to do would be just to drop into the taxidermist and just ask them, maybe how to do it. A lot of times when guys are traveling, we give them a little toolkit so that when they go, they've got some more detailed tools to use, as opposed to, a big buck knife or something. It's going to be kind of hard to skin around the deer's eye with a buck knife, and you might not have anything else. And your car keys aren't going to work very good. So they, something like that would be a good first step to make sure that you're getting stuff there in good condition. And that's going to be the first step to having something that's really, really nice. Like for you with your antelope and stuff, I mean, it's hot when you guys are, when you're hunting those. We've got a youth season deer here in Michigan where a lot of times it's in the 80s on that weekend. And a lot of guys just don't realize how quick that stuff can go bad. But even a warm October day can be detrimental to a hide. So it's definitely something to think about.
And that's one of the questions I had that I want to get to. And we're talking about it now, so let's just talk about it now. Let's say it is an early season deer. It's 80 degrees out. What's a reasonable time frame, like to be sure it's good? How long in hours do you have to get that cape off? And I know, like for myself, a lot of times I'm not super comfortable caping the face, so I'll cape the body of the deer up to the neck and then cut the head off. But I know, just from experience now, even leaving that meat on the head can ruin the cape. So how long do you have on an 80-degree day to make sure it's good to get that cape off the deer?
Yeah, not one of the things I always tell customers is like a gallon of milk. How long do you want to leave a gallon of milk sitting out and still drink it? Maybe a half day in 80, 85 degrees in the sun. The shade makes a big difference. By the next day at 85 degrees, I'm not sure about what your what your level of gastronomy is, but I'm probably going to pass on milk that's been sitting out for 24 hours. It's going to might be a little much, but that would be a good comparison, like
Okay.
to put something in somebody's mind. But the other thing that has a big impact is direct sunlight, the mass of the animal, and then whether it's wet or not. So direct sunlight is just going to heat that up, and it's going to keep the heat from dissipating off of the carcass, and that carcass is warm. And I'm sure you've had that experience before where, you didn't find a deer right away, and you get up there and one side of the deer is pretty good, but the side that was laying on the ground that was insulated, that goes bad, that mass has held the heat there and it lets bacteria get going in that hide. And once they start, it's really hard to get them to stop. So probably the most important thing to do is just, make the mass smaller so that it can, cool down. I don't really know what the body temperature of a deer is, but it's got to be 100 degrees or something, like a dog is. So even if you can get that stripped down and it's 80, you just save 20 degrees. That's going to save you, that's going to save you some time. Lay it out, let it cool in the shade, in the breeze. Just try to get it off of that animal as soon as you can, so you can start the process of getting it cooled down. Would probably be the biggest thing. Bullet wounds, any moisture, especially stomach fluids or any digestive fluids, those are going to really jumpstart bacterial action in the hair. And that blood, you can dry that off as best you can. A lot of guys, what we've seen, especially during rifle season, which is a problem, is they go to the butcher or the processor, and he's got a bunch of them to do, and so they are caping and skinning those deer out, and then they've got to keep their shop clean, and they're spraying that down with a hose a lot. A lot of times you get a lot of overspray on capes and stuff that can make them go bad really quickly. We get a lot of wet ones in like that. And as soon as it's wet, that's a jump start for your bacteria too. So, 85 degrees, leave it all together. It's raining or it gets wet in a creek or something like that. You really don't have a ton of time. You're going to have to really get after it if you want to save that hide, I think.
Okay. So just to summarize, what I think I heard you say is get the cape off as soon as possible. Keep it out of direct sunlight. Keep it dry. Is that a good summary?
I think that's a great summary. Yep. Fast as you can.
Oh, great tips. Appreciate that.
And some of it is limited, like for you guys where you're way out, in Michigan, it's not such a big deal. But for you guys, a lot of times you're way out. And I think you just got to do the best that you can do and be conscientious of it, especially if it's someone going out to hunt with you. Like, this is my dream, is to come out and kill a high plains mule deer. That's a life goal. You want to be prepared, to make the most of what you end up with so that you can bring it back and preserve it. Because a lot of people, that's a big part of going on a trip like that, is they want to have that in their house to be able to show it off. And a little bit of planning ahead of time to make sure that you can make the best of whatever situation you're in, I think would be tremendously beneficial for you, the mount, and your taxidermist probably.
Yeah. And while we're talking about preparation, one of the things that I do, and it costs a couple bucks, but to me it's worth the insurance, is every time I go out early season, like you said, if I'm antelope hunting early deer when it's 70, 80, 90 degrees, I keep the cooler on the back of my truck and I fill it up with ice every time I leave. And then I usually take 1 or 2 contractor bags. So if I get an animal, I quarter it up right away. If I'm going to taxidermy it, I cape it out. I put the meat in game bags, put them on ice in the cooler, and then so I don't get the hide all over the meat, I'll put the hide in a contractor bag, but I can also put it in the cooler that way. And usually I'll let it air out, like you said, in the shade, maybe an hour. That cools it down to whatever the ambient temperature is. So that, like you said, you might go from 100 to 70 degrees and then put it on ice.
Yeah.
And I haven't had any issues doing that.
No, you're exactly the kind of guy taxidermist loves.
Yeah. Well, hey, like you said, you want to keep it. You don't want to slip and hide or whatever. So,
yeah.
Let's talk about removing a deer from the field. So Michigan specifically, out here, a lot of guys quarter it up. In Michigan, a lot of guys drag their deer out. So are there any potential issues with dragging a deer, potentially damaging the cape? And if so, are there any ways that you're aware of to either eliminate or minimize the risk associated with dragging a deer?
Yeah, absolutely. Probably if it's a buck, attaching to the antlers is a lot better than around the neck. And putting that rope, and this is true for hanging them also. So a lot of some of the guys will hang them by the neck in the garage for a while, especially here. It's cool, during rifle season in Michigan. So they'll have them hanging. But what happens is that rope will break hairs. It's not really going to harm the hide or anything, but those hairs break, and those hairs are really difficult to get to not show that rope mark. So you could have a beautiful cape and a beautiful animal that's been in great shape, but then you've got this ring of broken hairs around its neck. It's really difficult for a taxidermist to get rid of those for you. So we like to hang them by the antlers or pull them by the antlers. We had a fellow that was hunting in Kansas, and they had killed a nice buck, and then drug it back with a four-wheeler. I'm not sure how far, but it may have been down a gravel road, or I'm not really sure what happened to that poor thing. But by the time they brought it, there was a lot of the one side was gone, and they were really surprised. They're like, "Well, you can't do anything with that." Well, man, that bugger's just about naked,
Yeah.
on that side. And, it's just like some little things like that, just a little bit of forethought, like throw him up on the back of the four-wheeler instead of dragging him that way. Same thing if you had to cross a creek, if there's any way to keep that thing from getting wet when you're dragging across, or a swamp or something like that, try to keep it dry. I've seen things where they look like a little kid sled like we would have had when we were kids. They're like a roll-up piece of plastic, and you can put them on a deer to make them slide easier. Those would be good too, to just protect that hide. In Michigan, I don't think we have very much trouble. It's not been very often I've had trouble with them being how they were brought in, but it does seem to be a bigger thing out west. Like when we're doing deer from out west, I think your soil out there is probably a lot harsher. It's rockier, more shale and stuff like that. I think it's a lot sharper edges, and it really can be rough on those animals when you're dragging them. So
yeah, and the reason
I would not drag.
Yeah, and the reason I asked, quick anecdote here. So the first time I hunted in Montana was with a friend in 2017. I was a non-resident, so I had a non-resident tag, and my friend ended up shooting a mule deer, and we were very ill prepared. We had our small day packs, not our meat packs. We didn't have game bags. We did add knives, so we were able to gut the deer. A long story short, we ended up dragging this deer a little over 2 miles, which sounds ridiculous, but that's the honest distance we drug it. We had the onyx measured out, and like you said, rockier soil and a lot of sage. And we actually drug the hide off the one hind quarter. We left, and we didn't realize it at the time, but we left the one side down the whole time that we drug it for 2 miles, and we got back and the skin was still there, but the hair was all gone. So, I mean, you could definitely damage the cape dragging it, and especially in rougher soil, like you said.
Nobody ever means to do anything like that, but you're excited. You want to get done. You're trying to get it back. And, some of those are just some heartbreaking, we've had, clients that went out. They tell me before they're going, we're going for, a mule deer out west or an elk out west. And I mean, it's their dream to do it. And then somewhere in the process, they're dragging it with a truck down the gravel road back to camp or whatever. And then it gets here and you're like, and there are some things that we can do, but, we talked about costs too. What cost is one thing, but when you get to a point where you really can't salvage some of those things, or, salvage a shoulder, there's always different posing we can do to try to help with things like that. But there are some of them that it's heartbreaking. They come in and you're like, man, the hair is falling right out of this thing. I really, I'll try it if you want me to, but you got to, realize that if it comes back, naked from the tannery, there's not a lot we can do. And that's, I always feel bad about that. And you feel like the bad guy because you're sharing that information, but it's important I feel like it's important to share that with a guy, because man, that'd be rough to get that back and have one side be naked, and
yeah,
that'd be devastating. You got to look at that for forever.
And that's why I wanted to talk to you and, get some of this information out there. I mean, I know there's some good resources already, but people that listen to the show, some of these things aren't things you necessarily think about, especially if it's the first deer or first animal you're going to take to a taxidermist. These things aren't at the top of your mind, so it's good information to get out there.
Yeah, well, I can tell you, whoever their taxidermist is, that's what keeps them up at night.
Sure,
Your
sure.
taxidermist is thinking about it all the time.
Oh,
And it's funny because, we talk about the capes like that, and I don't know if you and I have had that experience, but we'll have all of them on the wall in here, and the guys would be coming to pick them up, and they'll be like, well, um, mine's the one that's the 8-point or the 10-point or whatever. And as a taxidermist, I have no idea what their antlers are. Um, those sit in we have a secure spot that we keep them all locked up all the time so that they're safe. But what your taxidermist is dealing with is that cape. And I can tell you, we were just talking about that with your mule deer, you and Jake's mule deer, like how different those two capes looked.
yeah.
And your taxidermist is really in tune to what those deer look like. And I've learned over the years for sure, like when you see, from the road, you see deer and you think they all look the same, but when you put them on the wall in here, even without their antlers, I could tell you who everybody's deer is just by what their faces look like, the patterns on their faces and the coloring on their faces. Every one of those deer, if I was another deer and at any time of the year, I'd be able to tell, well, there's Joe and there's Sally and there's whoever, because when you learn how to look at them, it's shocking how different all of their faces and patterns and colorations are. And I love that about them. And we try to enhance that on some of them.
Yeah, no, it's cool. And I've got a deer. It's not in here, but I got another deer mounted where it doesn't have a throat patch, and it's super common.
Right.
Just got a dark, brown spot. There's no white there.
And sometimes they've got, it's not up here in Michigan anyways, it's not common. Sometimes they've got two spot throat patches. And we've had a couple times where they've had three. That's a pretty cool looking animal. We had one, it was a youth season deer that just came in last week. And that deer, I actually called the fella, and we are kind of going to revamp what we're going to do with that deer as far as posing wise. But it has a black stripe from between its ears all the way its whole body. That's probably up on its neck. It's probably 3 inches wide, but down across its shoulder and its back, it's probably 6 inches wide. I've only ever seen one like that before. And it's just such an unusual cape and such a cool looking thing that we're going to try to do the positioning a little bit just to be able to show that off, because it'd be a shame just to have it hanging and not be able to see that part of the story because it's so unusual.
Yeah, I won't say his last name, but I'm pretty sure that's Kevin's daughter's deer, right?
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
I saw that on Facebook. That is a very unique cape, and especially that short early season cape like that. That's a really cool looking deer.
We're so excited to work on that. We're going to try to do something cool to really enhance that. And that's the best part about doing this work, is trying to show that animal in its best light. That's a unique animal. And so, man, why not show that? His daughter will have that hanging in her house her whole life, probably. Can always say, that's my first deer. And not only is it her first deer, but it's such a unique animal. It's just really cool to celebrate the uniqueness of that animal for always, because every person, from once we get that thing done and it's hanging, every person is going to comment on that thing's stripe, because how many times have you ever seen that? It's really cool.
Yeah, super cool. I want to take a minute to mention huntingbeastgear.com. Co-founded by the big buck serial killer himself, Dan Infalt, Hunting Beast Gear features state-of-the-art manufacturing techniques, the highest quality materials, and innovative designs that have been engineered, field-tested, and refined to perfection by a group of the best mobile hunters on the planet. www.huntingbeastgear.com delivers cutting-edge products, including beast gear climbing sticks with weight reduction holes designed to deliver incredible durability in a lightweight stick. Beast gear climbing sticks also feature non-staggered inline stacking and double steps, all in a 2.2-pound package, including the fastening strap. HuntingBeastGear.com has also released the game-changing Beast Gear Hang-On Tree Stand. Designed to be the ultimate hang-on tree stand solution, with over 4 years of prototyping, testing, and refinement, the Beast Gear stand features a 16-inch wide by 29-inch long platform. The stand comes in at an incredible 6.8 pounds, and it does all that without compromising strength or durability. The Beast Gear stand is finished with a long-lasting anodized coating and features grade 8 hardware, high-quality Delrin washers, beast buttons, and adjustment knobs. For more details and to place your order today, head on over to www.huntingbeastgear.com. Now, back to the podcast. So, speaking of youth season, today is the 26th of September. We're probably, for the most part of the country, well past having to worry about velvet. But I know every year from the youth season or guys that go out of state and hunt early openers like Montana, like Nebraska, North Dakota, 3-part question here. So if you need me to repeat any, let me know. But first one, describe the best practices for handling a velvet deer in the field. Let's just go one at a time. What's your best practices? So I shoot a velvet deer September 1st, and I got it down. I know it's a lot more sensitive. What do I do? What helps the taxidermist out to get it there in the best shape possible?
Yeah, gentle.
Okay.
Gentle would be the word for that. No matter what stage of velvet it is, that velvet is fragile, and you've got to be really careful of it. It's a lot more prone to any kind of scratch. Like we were talking about rocks and shale and stuff like that. Like it's a lot more sensitive to any nicks and abrasions and stuff like that. So if you want to preserve that velvet, the very first step is going to be handling that deer differently. Because, you know, most of the time you're going to go right up, you kill that deer, you're going to go right up, grab them antlers, drag it around a little bit by the antlers. But if it's got velvet on there, it's very possible, depending on what stage of development those antlers are at, or you're getting to the end, you could grab a hold of those antlers and pull and just take the whole, you know, a big chunk right off with you. There's a lot of blood in those antlers. Even when they're getting close to coming off, it's a lot of fluid, a lot of blood, and there's not a lot of tissue there. It's right under the surface. And I don't know, but bacteria, you know, if you could ask them what their favorite meal is, they'd be like, yeah, the armpit of a deer, or, you know, the ear hair or something like that. But they'd be like, man, best thing for a bacteria is velvet antlers, man. We'd love to, you know, ruin those. And so again, really quick getting them apart. We had a little trouble here because we had some velvet antler deer coming in, and the guys a lot of times just want to bring them and get them here fast so that we can get them taken care of. That's a good idea. And then we're really careful with them to get them cold and get them froze as quick as you can. The other thing I'd throw onto that probably is, you know, for depending on where you are, I don't really know how it goes in Montana, but here in Michigan, when our guys from Michigan are going out to see you, for example, they can't bring the whole skull back.
Yeah.
You know, you can't come into the state with an intact skull of a deer outside of the state. So you're going to have to, if you have velvet antlers, you're going to have to strip that down ahead of time. And I would just do that as best as you can. If that's a possibility, I'd say talk to your taxidermist, see if you can get some tips from them about skinning around those. And when you cut them in two, make kind of like a V shape. That helps us out quite a bit too, because the best way to it's going to be really hard to transport them, especially if it's a big set of antlers, to transport them intact. And so it helps a lot for storage and just keeping them from getting beat up. Just to split those two antlers right down the center of the skull, but just do it in kind of a V shape, so that way there's only one way for those antlers to go back together. If you cut it straight, we can put it, any taxidermist is going to be able to put it back together, but it's a little more frustrating for us. But if you put that V shape in there, that V shape cut, there's really only one way for those things to go back together. And that really helps us a lot also.
So that's news to me. Are you talking about cutting the actual skull plate in half?
Yeah, so you would cut your regular skull plate off just like you normally would do with an antler deer, but right in between the antlers, you're going to make a cut. But instead of making a cut that's right straight down the middle, so that it's a nice straight line, which you might think was better. And this is true of even antler deer too. Like if you had to fly on a plane or something, and you needed to make those, make the package smaller instead of a giant set of antlers. When you split that skull, just instead of going straight, just start in from the front on an angle, and then start in on the back on an angle, make a V, meet about in the middle where the antlers are. And that helps your taxidermist quite a bit too.
Okay. And the one caveat, hey, not trying to disagree with you, but just in case people do have a trophy deer that they ever want to have entered in the record book.
Well, don't do that.
don't
if you're going to score it, don't do that.
Yeah, don't cut your skull plate in half. If you don't care about Pope and Young or Boone and Crockett, then cut it in half. But if you do, don't do that, because then that disqualifies you from getting in the books.
Yeah, if I get hate mail for that one, I'm gonna blame it on you.
Hey, we clarified. I think we shouldn't get any hate mail.
But yeah, that would absolutely be true. But the truth is, most of the deer that we're doing in a year we're not real worried about them being record book animals. It's a guy it means a lot to the guy, but or the gal, but it's not something that's going to be contested or anything. But you're absolutely right, boy. If you got a monster, boy, do not split that, because then you're all done, right? I mean, that's the end of it.
Yeah. Yep. So one other question I had, you answered one of them, so we're going to skip that one. Another one I had about talking about velvet was, you talked about some of the extra work that goes into that, and extra work means extra money. So in your opinion, and this is going to vary by locality, right? I'm not asking for an exact number, but what should a guy expect to pay extra for a shoulder mount when he's dealing with a velvet deer? Is that $100, $200, $500? Like, what's that look like?
A couple $100 probably. But it's going to depend on how a person is going to deal with it. There's several different ways to deal with that velvet. I don't think any taxidermist, I guess I don't know, but my opinion. So my opinion is best method to preserve that velvet is freeze dry. And the freeze drying process costs some money, and probably just as much is the shipping or the handling and stuff of those antlers to get them to the freeze dryer. We don't have a freeze dry system in house here. We're like a craft brew place. We're not a big operation here. This is a small place. So
boutique taxidermy.
What's that?
I said boutique taxidermy.
Yeah, that's probably a good description of it. So we're going to have to ship out for a freeze dry opportunity like that. And once it's freeze dried, that thing's, it's not going to change. They're going to put chemicals into it. They're going to drain the blood out of it, whatever needs to come out of it. And then once it goes through that freeze dry process, it's just like an MRE or anything like that. I mean, that's, you could bury that in the basement and be good to eat, 200 years from now or whatever. So that's our preferred method to do it. There are some other ways with some chemicals and injection and stuff. I have done those when I was younger, but at this stage for me, if you bring me a velvet antler deer, I'm gonna convince you to go with freeze dry, and that's really for us it's a little bit different, but we're basically we're gonna charge you pretty much what we get charged. It's just a process of having to get done. There might be a little bit of time involved for shipping it and getting it back, but it's really important to make sure that velvet is going to stay stable for forever. And that's the only way I know of right now to be able to do that. And that's kind of an industry standard for sure.
Okay, no, that's good to know, because I've heard of some in other interesting ways that I won't mention because I don't want to steer anybody wrong. I've heard of some weird
I've done, yeah. Well, and when I didn't know any better, when I was younger, I did stuff that didn't work, and um, stuff like that still, that still would bother me today. There's no way we're putting anything out of here like that. We were talking about how long stuff will last because, I'm a little bit older than you are, but when I was a kid, you'd have all these old mounts. You'd be in a barn or a garage, and you'd see, the mouth's falling apart, and the eyes are falling out, and the ear, like the hair's falling out of them. There's like all these horrible things, just because back then they didn't have the technologies that we have today to preserve these animals. Like that one, I can see that one right off your ear there that we did. It's one of my favorite ones that we've done recently. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that mount. And that thing's going to be good for forever. I'll be dead. You'll be dead. It'd be little grandkid Gillespie's running around, and they'll be like, that's grandpa's deer. The technologies and the methods that we're using today, they are going to really, really last a long time, like way past our lifetimes, if they're handled, done properly. And that's pretty cool, I think.
Super cool.
So when we're talking about velvet antlers, I need my velvet to last just as long as that mount is. And so that's for me, that's the balance. I'm going to try to talk the fella into doing freeze dry. I feel like that'll be the most durable method for the long term. So, baby Gillespie can see grandpa's velvet mule deer or whatever. So,
yeah. Let's talk about getting the actual cape off the deer. And for your answer here, assume this is the first time a guy's done it, right? And he's going to do it himself. So where do you cut? And I think from what I've seen or heard, not from you directly, but just in general, seems like one of the common mistakes is to cut the cape too short. So where do I make my cuts on the deer when I'm removing the cape? And let's talk like in terms of the body, from the front shoulder to the hind quarter. Where should I make that circumference cut around the deer to ensure that it's long enough, especially like a pedestal mount, right? That takes more cape. So if I'm going to consider a pedestal mount, I probably want to cut it a little longer. Give me your take. Like, is there such a thing as too long?
No. So I would say probably if you have any doubt, just leave the whole thing on there. Let your taxidermist handle that. Just skin it. It's hanging upside down, so you're gonna skin that thing down. Just give your taxidermist the whole thing would be my suggestion. Just like you said, the trend in the last decade for sure is more and more shoulder showing on mounts. Back when I started, there was hardly even like what we would, like the length of brisket we would get to, like if I got that length of brisket today, I'd be horrified because we'd be like, man, it's going to be a little tiny mount. But back then, there wasn't a lot of brisket shown and not a lot of shoulder shown. And today, though, the trend is definitely lots more shoulder, lots more back, and that all takes a lot of cape. And I don't probably think the average guy might realize or gal would realize how much hide they really need there. You're better off just to skin that whole thing down. Just give the whole thing to your taxidermist.
Yeah.
As far as the cuts, when it's up around that brisket, which is always a problem, is the way that I always tell the guys or whoever calls is when it's hanging up. Most of them are hanging upside down when they're working on them. Or if it's an elk and it's laying on its side, you can cut those front legs off at the knee or whatever it is that you're going to do. Right on the back of a deer's front leg, where there's a little bit longer hair there, and the white from the inside meets and forms a line with the brown on the front. And that's a good line to take up on the leg. If they're hanging upside down in a garage or in a situation like that, its belly is facing you and its two front legs are facing you. That line is right where you can see it really easily. The white on the inside of the leg and the brown on the out, and it makes a perfect target for you to follow with your knife. So you can just slide that knife right along that line until you get to the armpit. And then the most important thing there that I tell everybody is it seems like once they get to the armpit, they want to make a hard right turn and go over towards the center line of the animal. And you don't want to do that. You want to go up. So when it's hanging upside down, go to the armpit. Instead of making a right turn and going crossways, just go up. And you can still follow that brown and white line right up, and then just kind of eventually angle over to whatever cut you made for gutting it. And then you're just staying away from that whole chest area. Because if you're getting more shoulder on the deer mount, you're also getting a lot more brisket on the mount. I've got you and Jake's is sitting here in the shop right now, and geez, there's probably 10 inches of worth of brisket on that mount. That's a long ways back, that your average person might not realize they need that much. And there's no sense limiting, your taxidermist will never be mad if you bring more than less. They won't mind at all.
Yeah. And what I've started doing, because we're doing so many of the deer in the field because we're packing them out, the example that you gave, following the line, is great. And then when I get to what's the armpit, like you said, instead of making a hard cut down to the brisket, I go almost parallel to the body then. So let's say you're looking at, a deer on its side, and there's the midline of the very bottom of the belly. I'm probably 8 inches to a foot above that, and I cut from the armpit straight across. And
oh yeah.
And I actually go back now. So I do make a little cut at the brisket, right where the sternum of the deer would be. But when I'm caping one that I know I'm going to mount, I go back from there, like even 6 inches, to make the circumference cut around the body. And I've been leaving them, and you're probably glad, but I learned this because I cut one too short. If you're looking from the front shoulder to the hind quarter, I go like 3/4 of the way back. I make the cape super long, because then who knows what you might want to do with it, whether it's a shoulder mount or half body mount, whatever. You don't limit yourself that way. I mean, other than maybe a full body mount, but I'm not doing any of those.
No, I agree. That's why I want to send you Valentine's, every year, is because it's a two-way street, right? For a taxidermist. A taxidermist, you want to work with somebody that is going to help you a little bit. That means a lot. That puts you on the A list of stuff that's going to happen around there, and that makes a big difference. That's a relationship between the two of you, and it's all that is very appreciated, because you're just assuming that whoever the taxidermist is, they want to do a good job for you. They want to make sure that that animal looks as good as it can possibly look. And when you, like you say, you start to limit things, like you don't have enough of that brisket or enough of that shoulder, those are hard conversations to have. When it didn't have to happen, there was no reason to cut it off. You could have just left it. And the bottom line is pretty much no matter what you do to it, as long as you aren't throwing chunks over your shoulder into the woods, and you bring the whole thing, we can put it back together. I've got a bear that came in yesterday that was caped really roughly, and it takes a little bit of searching around, but you can find that piece that that's got to be brought back up there. And as long as the piece doesn't get chunked off and thrown in the woods, then we can put that back in there and put it right where it was. And these days, anybody's going to be able to do that in a way that's not looking awkward or anything.
Sure. And I think, and part of the reason I want to bring it up, especially like the cape length, is looking back to myself, like the first deer that I wanted to get mounted, I didn't know any of this stuff, right? Luckily I was in Michigan. I was able to take the deer. I don't know if you know Troy Harrison, but I don't even know if he's doing taxidermy anymore. But he's a younger guy, probably even maybe a year or two younger than me. And at the time, he was quite a bit younger, so he was probably early 30s. Anyways, he did them, and he was able to cape the deer out for me, so I didn't have to do that. But when I started doing my own, the first one I cut too short, and the guy's like, "Hey, you got to cut these longer." So it, my whole point is sometimes you don't know until you know, and that's kind of again why I'm doing this podcast. Is there's a lot of little tips after you've done 3, 4, 5, or 10 of your own, and obviously you with 35 years of experience, like there's things you can do to help it out up front to get a much better result.
Oh, and that's why I love doing something like this, is just to be able to, get the word out. I'll be getting Valentine cards from other taxidermists, just be, like,
Yeah.
man, that was, like that, we appreciate it because that deer comes in a lot better shape. And nobody, I think most people just don't think about any of those things, and some of those things are pretty important. It'd be just like a builder for your house. You don't think about how that house is framed up, but your builder is, and he's doing a lot of things out there. You don't have any idea what he's doing, but they're really important things that he did to make sure your house doesn't fall down. So
Sure.
it's the same thing for us. There's a lot of little things that are going on, and you can help a taxidermist out that way. And we just want to, like for me, again, we just want to make sure that that these things look as good as they can look, and it's going to look like you have in your head. You have an image in your head of what that mount's going to look like. We just want to make sure that we match that, because as soon as you show up and it doesn't look like that image in your head, then our relationship is damaged a little bit, probably.
Yeah. Yep. And that's like I said, a lot of times that some of that is out of your control, right? Like you got a cape in that stayed warm too long and now the hair's slipping, or it got drugged behind the four-wheeler, or whatever the case is. It's like, yeah, you do the best with what you have to work with. And again, that's another reason why the better you can take care of it before it ever gets to you, the better outcome you can have.
We had a bear that came in one time. It was a Canadian bear, and I was getting that bear apart for the fella, and I had asked him. I'm like, "What happened to this bear?" Because the chest of it looked like maybe it got run over by a lawnmower or landed on a helicopter that was, that was going. And so I was like, what happened to this thing? Like, why does it look like this? And the bear was injured. And he said his guy jumped on it with a hatchet and was killing the bear with the hatchet, by hitting it in the chest with the hatchet. And it looked like that. Like, it was remarkable what that looked like. And it was like, like if you want a challenge, it's like you buy them 100-piece puzzles. It's like, there wasn't really anything that was cut off. But it took a long time, like, to figure out, like, oh, he made a slice here, and then this goes here, and then this goes here. And eventually we were able to get it all together and salvage that thing. But somewhere I have a picture of it, because I'm like, man, I'm taking a picture of this, because this is the worst skinning job that it will ever exist. And I hope I never see one worse than that. But I'll never forget that. That guy, he's like, yeah, that guy, he was still alive a little bit. He jumped right on him and started hitting him with the hatchet. I was like, holy moly.
Pro tip, don't hatchet your cape. You're going to have taxidermy.
So some of them are obvious, right? Or you think they're obvious, but maybe they're not.
Let's talk about cape preservation. So out here in Montana, we have an interesting way of me getting my cape to you, which involves putting it on a semi truck to the tannery in Michigan. We don't need to get into all the details, but what that means often is I'm putting my caped but not fleshed. I don't take any of the extra flesh. I don't finish skin the inside of the ears or anything. I put it in the freezer. So talk to me about what's a best practice or best practices for putting a cape that's skin in the freezer to make sure that it doesn't get damaged, and how long can that last in the freezer?
So freezer is great. Freezer as soon as possible, and then until it can get to the taxidermist. In the process of freezing, I would prefer like a cape that's folded rather than like rolled up. If you imagine, like, especially, like your mule deer, that thing's got inches of fur on it. It's amazing how thick that fur is on a late season mule deer. So if you roll that into, it looks nice, like you roll it into a jelly roll, but you put that in the freezer, and the insulatory properties of that hide, I mean, it's very possible that the center of that thing might not freeze for days inside of there. And so we want to chill it and freeze it as quick as we can. So when we're putting that cape in there, the best thing to do would be to kind of fold it. Think more like clothes, like how you would fold up a hoodie or a sweatshirt or something like that. Fold it like that, as opposed to a sleeping bag. A sleeping bag would not be desirable to roll it, to freeze it like that. Once it's froze, if you got it, go ahead.
Real quick, is it better when you're folding it in that style? Is it better to put flesh on flesh or hide on hide?
Man, that's a good question. I just put, anytime we do them, I'm doing them here, and I don't know if it's a reason, if it's better, or if it's just because of the way it is. But I always put just flesh to flesh, and then just fold it. If nothing else, it's keeping things cleaner, and it looks nicer when I put it in there. I don't know if I have any scientific evidence for one way or the other, but that's how we do it, is just fold it out and put it in there. But folding about as big as you can stand. So, like if you think about how big a hoodie sweatshirt is folded, that's pretty good for you might have 2 or 3 folds in there for a cape. That's pretty good. It's more of a rectangle shape, and it's maybe a couple inches thick.
And then you want to put, I'm assuming, the head and the ears towards the top of that pile, correct?
Yeah, head or the ears more towards the top. Again, it's going to freeze so quickly that way. You won't really, it's not going to be a big deal. The only concern that you have that happens sometimes is sometimes folks will freeze freeze them, and then the ears are in kind of a weird position, and so they're kind of like sticking out, kind of wonky in the freezer. Your kids are throwing hot dogs and frozen hot dogs in there, and there's a bunch of 5-pound packages of hamburger that lands on it. And if you can get everything is kind of to lay in there in a nice way, like when I package them up here, the head's on top, the head is flat, kind of facing me, and I lay the ears down, and then it's folded underneath there. So it makes a nice little package, and then they're frozen that way. There's not really anything that can get broken or chipped or bent in the in the freezer if it's going to be in there for a while and you're throwing food or whatever else on top of it. So that would be a tip, I guess, to keep it kind of not sticking out, kind of all wonky where it could get damaged.
Okay. And then I don't know if I missed it or if we did talk about it, but now I've got it in the freezer. I've got it not sleeping bag. I've got it folded like a hoodie. I got it flat. How long can that stay reasonably? I mean, I'm sure there's an upper limit, but what's the longest you would want one in before it got to you to finish skin and send off to the tannery?
Yeah, those are really hard things to answer, I think. I think a lot of it depends on what your freezer is at home. Like a defrosting freezer is a lot rougher on, I don't know if you can even buy them. I've got one that's an old one here that works pretty good. That's not a defrosting one, but, really you don't want it to be any longer. I have some, we deal with it pretty frequently where a guy or someone will get a deer and they're not sure if they want to do anything with it, or they're waiting to see, kind of, maybe they got a trip coming up, or money's an issue right now. They want to hang on to that cape in case they want to do something with it, but they don't want to do something with it right then. Usually, if it's longer than for that year, that season, what I suggest is I just ask them to let me send it. Just bring it in, let me send it. Let's get it tanned. We'll only do the price of the just the prepping and the tanning for it. Once that comes back from the tanner, you can put it back in the freezer, fold it back up and put it back in the freezer. You can either rehydrate it or not, or just put it back in the freezer. Once you put it back in the freezer and it's been tanned, I think the shelf life on it then is indefinite.
Okay.
It's going to last. It's going to be there for forever. If you get it back and you send it out to get it tanned, you get it back and you got the cape hanging in your house like that. I think it's about a year. Probably not any more than 2 years for that cape to just be sitting out to the elements, not being frozen. There is a time frame once it's tanned. There is a time frame that we got to pay attention to if you're not going to mount it right away.
Okay.
So I always just suggest put it. We'll get it back from the tannery. Usually I'll rehydrate them because then we get all the measurements and stuff on them, and then we'll package it back up, freeze it. That thing is good for forever.
Okay.
They'll be digging that up with the pyramids or whatever someday, so it'll be fine.
So when in doubt, get it in as soon as possible, take it to the tannery, get it tanned, and then put it in the freezer. Don't leave it untanned in the freezer for any extended period of time.
Yeah.
Not any longer than you have to.
And you and I know each other well, so I'm probably more conservative about all this stuff than maybe others are. I worry about all that stuff a lot. I don't like telling people no. So we're pretty, like, I'm probably over engineering all of that stuff. I would say, like, we're really trying to make sure that stuff is kept in good shape and things are going to be as nice as they can be. And I might not have to be that conservative about it, but if it's something that's important to you, like if you've got that deer, you're looking to spend $700, $800 on getting that thing mounted. It means a lot to you. Why not take a little bit of extra precaution to make sure that it's going to be just what you want, and you don't have to hear, well, no, we can't do this, or we can't do that, or we can't do it at all, or whatever. I mean, just that little bit of extra effort or a little bit of extra dollars up front would solve all those problems.
Yeah. Yep. It's funny if you spend all the money on the rifle and the hunting trip or the bow or whatever, and then you don't want to spend $100 to send it out to the tannery. It's I've been guilty of foolish things in the past, but when you look at it in the grand scheme of things, to not just get it to the tannery as soon as possible, kind of foolish if you think there's any chance you're going to mount it.
Oh yeah. And you're going to, you got to look at that thing every day for the rest of your life, probably. Like, and when you look at it, if there's something the matter with it, you're just, every time you look at it, you're going to be like, like, it's just like just one more thing that you didn't need that day for eternity, But if every time you look at that thing, you're like, man, that's just a little pick me up to your day, and you remember that memory. You don't have anything that's interfering with that, a bad job or something's wrong or a chunk's missing or, whatever. The shoulders all ground off from the gravel road, like all of those things, like, why wouldn't you do that, is my thought on it.
Sure. And one of the other things I want to talk about when it comes to prepping the cape, and this is more of an infield thing too, I noticed, I don't usually do it, but I noticed some guys will go from like the space between the antlers and then on the midline of the back, like, where a mane would be on a horse, they'll split the cape all the way down. And then other guys will make a smaller, maybe a 8-inch to a foot incision, skin around the head, and then remove the head through there. So I call that a tube cut, I think is what it's called. So maybe talk to me about what are the advantages of disadvantages of either splitting it all the way down or making that tube cut to pull the skull through.
Well, it's amazing. It's interesting how, like, a lot of the things that happen are like how they get perpetuated over time. When in the old days, that was the only way to do it. And I'm talking way older than me days. That was the only way to get a hide tanned. because the tannery that was, every little town had a tannery, or, there weren't that many tanneries around. It was a tannery that was going to tan both hides for garments and hides for taxidermy. There was a time in history where there wasn't just like now it's a multi-million-dollar business, but back then it was just whoever the tannery was, he's making harnesses and coat, like whatever. He's just the tanner. He's not doing stuff just for taxidermists. And so the taxidermists are sending to this guy that's not a specialist for them. And we still have those tanneries around. There's still garment tanneries around the country that we use for different things. Back in those days, they had to split that because no tannery was going to deal with a tube skin. They didn't want to have to deal with that. They got to shave that thing, and they're working with cowhides or whatever. So it had to be split, otherwise the tanneries wouldn't take it. But I don't know when taxidermy tannery really got the technology really came about. It must have been 80s maybe. You started to have tanneries that are specific to just taxidermists, and the tan is completely different. And the tannery doesn't expect to have that split. It's not a labor issue for them anymore, because that's just part of the process. Is they know that all taxidermists hate to sew, so we don't want to have any more sewing than what we have to. So now you don't have to split that up the back. Some things like an antelope, you have to go a little farther down because they got their little scrawny neck and their great big bobblehead that they've got there. And sometimes, like with an elk cape or something, if you got an elk on the side of a mountain, it's going to be really tough to, unless a couple grizzly bears stop by to help you out, you're going to have a really hard time like tubing that thing, So you're going to have to go up the back, and that's how it goes. But in general practice, for most things, if you can access it, we don't want to have a seam up the back. Just like you said, Billy, we do like what we do is like a T cut. So you're going from antler to antler, and then I don't go, a straight line from antler to antler, kind of towards the back edge of the antler where they are on his head. And then we're going to make a line, just like you said, like where a horse's mane would be, right down the center of its back. But if I'm doing it here, I'm going to do it as short as I possibly can, that I can get the skull out. Sometimes that's harder in the field, or depending on where you're at. If you got a big set of antlers, sometimes you can't get down the neck very far because its antlers are so big, the hide piles up there, and you can't get all the way right to the base of the skull. But in general, you want to make that cut as short as possible that you can. It's just dollars. For a taxidermist, sewing takes time, and just like any, we're artists too, but we're also we've got to do it for a living. And time is money. It's no different than the mechanic or the builder or whatever. So we want to have that cut as short as we can. And then the other plus side of that is seams always have a potential to move around. And if you don't have a seam, it can't move around. And so when you got that seam up the back, all of us have seen old mounts where it's separated or pulled apart, and you can see the stitching and stuff. There's just there's no reason for that. And so it's just better to not have a seam there if it's possible. Or that's my opinion anyways.
Yeah. And I kind of thought tubing, just from talking to you, was the preferred way. And like you said, it's not always possible, but when it is, it seems like that's the way to go. And if you're not familiar with doing that, I've done it once or twice myself now, but I watched a lot of videos before I attempted that task, and I think I did okay. But the safest thing to do, what I often do in the field, is I'll roll that up to the neck, like you said, till the hide starts piling up. And you can't always get to the base of the skull, but you get as close as you can. And then you cut off, the top part of the neck and everything, and then take it into town and have a guy like yourself that's qualified skin the face out.
Yeah, I'll say, all of the stuff that we've handled with you, we can't count Jake in that, but
Yeah.
Like all the stuff that we handled has been good, and I love that. That's what I want. I want to, we've said it a million times, but you're just trying to make that thing be as nice as it can be, and those are all just little things that help.
Let's talk about forms. So I know this is a highly personal thing, but do you think there are certain forms that complement certain types of racks? So, for example, you got a real wide rack or a tall rack, or maybe think about like a 5x4 whitetail. Do you put the 5-point side out away from the wall or towards the wall? Give me some of your opinions on like best form selection.
Man, I don't know. Those are like the hard hitting questions. It's like
That's what I'm
Barbara
here for.
Walters or something. I feel like I'm going to start crying at some point here with your questions. Um, I think that it's really personal preference. There are antler. I know. I don't get that excited about the antlers. I'm worried about that face, but I know there's guys like you that get pretty excited about the antlers. So, like, we're looking at those antlers, and sometimes we'll play around with it a little bit in the shop here, just kind of looking at which way we want to view them. And the truth is, I think that it's really a personal thing for whoever's going to be looking at that thing every day. But I try to give some suggestions. There are times when that forward side out is going to really be something that you want to show. But there's a lot of times where that cooler side being on the back, it actually shows it a little bit better depending on what it is that's going on. So, we did a mount for a young man that I think it was killed in the youth season. It had like some stickers on the side of it. And so we were able to turn that where it's hanging on the wall. That one bigger sticker sticking out it looks pretty cool to have that on the front side. If we'd have had that on the back side, you wouldn't have been able to see that sticker as well. But there's other ones where the cooler side sometimes looks better on the inside. I would say probably for us, what we do is I like to play around with the ears a lot. And so on the day that we're doing that particular deer, once those antlers are on there, I'm trying, instead of just sticking ears on there and calling it good, I'm thinking of, it's kind of like on, like on The Price is Right. And then they would say, here is the new toaster. And then Vanna would like kind of use her hands to kind of like show off the toaster. That's how I'm imagining like the ears. Like I can use those. They're not just stuck there doing nothing. Like we can use those ears to kind of enhance what those antlers are shaped like. Sometimes when I'm playing with it, and I know you and I have done that a little bit, like I'll send you a picture, like, what about this? And what about this? And like we move them around a little bit. I like this. Do you like them like this? And play with those ears a little bit to just use them kind of as like a framing for the antlers. The best thing is a buck that's got little short ears. And I'm sure that they get made fun of by the bigger ear deer or whatever, but the deer have tremendous variation in the size of their ears, and not even just mule deer, but just whitetails themselves. Some whitetails have huge ears and other ones have little stubby ears. And anytime we have one with little stubby ears, I always try to put them ears forward because all the guys always think that, it's the width of the ears and whatever. Well, this guy's got little stubby ears. And so we'll put his ears forward. And if his antlers are, anywhere near that, it makes his antlers actually look bigger. If he's got giant ears, man, I'm not putting those ears forward because it could be a pretty nice rack. And those ears could actually make his antlers look smaller. And a lot of times with those, I like to lay them back a little bit, give a little bit more width there. Some deer have really nicely marked ears. They got like a real nice black edge. And a lot of times I like to show that depending on what those ears look like. But those are decisions that I'm making on the day that we do it. And just like you and I talk, a lot of times it's here's a picture. What do you think? This is what I think looks best for this deer. What do you think? And then, sometimes the guys would be like, I'd like them back a little more or off a little bit more. And then we can make some adjustments and make a decision on them.
Yeah.
And then as far as forms go, I think it has more to do with where you're going to hang it than anything. We just got a mule deer done that just went home to the fellow this past week, and it ended up being a shoulder pedestal mount, and that the antlers on that deer were really, really tall, and he had kind of an upright form. It was what he wanted, and that thing's going to take up a lot of space on a wall, like to the point where it might be in an 8-foot ceiling. It might be a little lower than what you might have thought you wanted to hang that deer, just because the antlers were so tall. And so I think the height of the wall and kind of where you're going to put it maybe has more of an impact on the form, as opposed to like how we would arrange the ears or something like that.
Yeah, just a couple things bounce off kind of following up on what you said. One of the things that I've done now, and I'm probably weird, but when you get the skull plate off, I like to hold it out in front of me against the wall and then rotate it like up, down, left to right. And then you can get an idea like, okay, here's what I want it to look like angle wise. And then I can send that picture to you and say, get a form that the head's going to have this kind of turn. And that's something we didn't talk about. We can talk about it in a second, but doing some customization of forms. And then the other thing I think that's real important is, I mean, you said you've been doing this for 35 years. I don't know how many deer you do a year, 50, 100, whatever the number is. I mean, that's thousands of deer you've done. And I think a taxidermist that's got some artistic ability, right? You have seen and done thousands of deer. Like, trust this guy's judgment, right? He knows what this rack is going to look like, or what form is going to complement it the best, which ear pose. Like, yeah, if you have a vision in your head, follow that. But if you don't, get some input, because that guy's got the experience. So that's just my add there.
No, I agree. I think that's probably true. A lot of times what I'll tell guys, when we first take, we've talked about it earlier, it might take a year to get it back. Some of the guys don't decide right that day. And so it's kind of like when you buy a truck. So like I bought my truck and I went and bought it, and I was like, man, that's the most beautiful blue color I've ever seen. I've never seen that color of truck before. I like that. I'm going to be, really original driving around that truck. And then literally there used to be a game I would play with my daughters when they were little. It was count how many dad's trucks we can find. We'd sit there at McDonald's and we'd have a contest to see who could spot them first. And you got extra credit for a topper and a rack and all that stuff. As soon as you have that truck, it's unbelievable how many people have that same color of truck. And as soon as you're thinking about a deer mount, you start to notice them a lot more. And so a lot of times I'll just tell guys, I'll be like, hey, I don't need to know right now. Over the next couple months, just start paying more attention to what you like and what catches your eye. And if you're somewhere like Cabela's or something, you see a mount that you really like, just snap a picture of that, send it to me. And, there's no secret, the forms there's only so many suppliers. And if you're a taxidermist that's been around for a while, you honestly are pretty good at identifying whose forms are what. And you can match that exactly, or take another one, like you said, and customize it and make sure that it matches it. So I love the idea that you said, where you kind of look at it and turn it, because when you think about it like that, there really are some, like, you can turn it ahead of you, and there are some positions that you like better than others. And I think that's well worth doing. I love that idea.
Yeah, that's actually that buck that you did for me with the stickers. I wanted something that was going to be, I didn't want a straight upright mount, which is like what this one is. I didn't want a straight upright mount because I already had one of those, and I kind of had that in the center of my wall. I wanted it turned, but I also wanted the rack kind of forward facing, which that one is not completely. It's got a little movement, but it's like, oh, well, what makes sense to have a forward facing rack and still have some turn? And it was a wall pedestal. So that's how I ended up deciding on that form.
Oh, and that's one of my, like I said, and take it or leave it, whether I'm blowing smoke or not. But that's one of our favorite mounts that we've done in the last couple of years. I love that mount. I loved working on it. I could not wait to show you the pictures of it.
Yeah.
And show you, on that day. And it's just like all the stuff we've talked about. Cape came in good condition. It's a beautiful deer. We got a cool pose. It's got amazing antlers with the little stickers. You start putting all that together, and I'm excited. Like the morning I'm going to work on that for you, I'm all excited. I'm like, man, I can't wait to do Jeremy's deer today, and that thing's it's going to look amazing, and I'm really excited. Like I'm up in the morning, I'm ready. I can't wait to work on it because you and I have worked together to come up with an idea of what that thing's going to be, and that's the best part of doing the job. Like I love that.
Yeah. No, and
it's very
your
rewarding.
genuine excitement shows through, and that's it's hard to gauge that when you're meeting someone for the first time, but I would say if there's any way you can find a taxidermist, to people that are listening, that's got the same level of passion that you do for turning out a good product, like that's the guy, right? If it costs more, if it takes a little longer, like who cares? Like you said, you're going to look at that thing. If you're 20, 30, 40, even 40 years old, I mean, you're going to look at that thing for 20, 30, 40 more years. So get it done right.
Yeah, no, I agree. And really, we're only nice to you for the most part because you're the, potential son-in-law of a local legend here. So,
Yeah.
that's why you get all kinds of special treatment.
that helps. And I only got a couple more questions for you, Chad. We're running up on a time here, and I want to keep you on the phone all night. But speaking of local legends, that's my girlfriend's dad, Boyd. Part of the reason that you accepted me as a client was because you knew him and you were good friends with Shauna's brother, Ryan. And otherwise, I don't know if I'd be on the client list. But being that you do such good work, and now that you're on the podcast, I think inevitably people are going to ask, are you accepting new clients? And so give me the answer, and then why or why not right now.
So the answer is no, with capital letters.
Yeah.
Because I'm still teaching, and it's too much. It's too much to go to be at school and then to come home and do that work. So a couple of years from now, I'll be retired. We'll be doing taxidermy full time. But even then, we're going to have a limit to what we'll take. We'll have a set limit, and the honest truth is we don't have very many new clients. I did taxidermy full time before I started to teach. This would have been 25 years ago almost, and we're still just doing work for the same people pretty much. It's either them or their kids or whatever. Over the course of all this time, we've been able to really assemble a nice group of clients that we enjoy working with, and we are definitely going to expand that as we go, but it'll still have to be somewhat limited because it's not fair. It's not fair to a person to have them to just take, and then tell the person it's going to be 4 years or 3 years or even 2 years. I would lose sleep if it was 2 years. If it takes 2 years to get their stuff back, like I'm not even gonna be able to sleep. I'm going to be so worked up over it. So, we're going to take what we can get done in a year, make sure those folks get their stuff and they have it done just the way they want it, and everybody's happy. And that's our business model going forward.
Yeah. And then last two questions here. This one's a quick one. You do, I think, amazing work. Super thrilled and I feel very fortunate to be a client of yours. If people want to just check out some amazing taxidermy, where can people find you online? You do have, I believe, a website and like any social media stuff you want to mention.
Yeah, so we do have a website. It's lazy8taxidermy.com. You can check out stuff on there. The same thing. We're just like I use that a lot. Like we're like a little craft brew place. Like we're not a big place, but you don't have to be a big place to do nice stuff. And if your listeners are thinking about that, there's places around that have bigger shops than what we have. But I'd argue that you can take any of our mounts and put them next to anybody's, and they'll be just as good or better. So just because the guy's got a smaller place, it's like they used to say, don't judge the man by his clothes, judge him by his work. And it's the same thing. Don't judge a taxidermist by the shop. Go see his work. Go there, look at his work, see what kind of work is being done, and maybe talk to some people, get some references, and go from there, I think.
And then the last thing, so because we're running out of time today, one thing that we didn't discuss at all is that I know you're a big upland bird hunter. I want to get you on another episode because you're a huge bird hunter in Michigan, and you actually do some guided bird hunts, right? So is there any chance we can get you back on, and maybe end of the year when your bird season winds down, and maybe we can talk about that?
Yeah, we would love that. And what I'd like to do is, if you end up home here for a little bit, we'd like to get you out, get you walking around, um, see what these dogs can do for you. But that's my passion. The two things that have been really constant in my life, from when I think back, is I've always loved dogs. I've always loved hunting with dogs. And so bird dogs do that for me today. The other thing that I've always loved is art. From the time I was little, my parents have stuff for me when I was tiny. Um, when I was little, I didn't think it would end up like this, but the taxidermy really scratches the itch for me of the artwork. You talked about the website. We have an apparel business too. It's all original artwork that we do. That's been nice too, because at night I go in, I'm working on new designs, and it's forced me to do more artwork. And I've been really enjoying and loving that. So just that, those two things have really permeated my life, uh, the whole time. And I feel very blessed that I'm able to do both of those still. I just turned 50 this year, so I feel very lucky that I get to do those things still.
Yeah, well, I hope you live to 100. I got a lot of hunting left, and hopefully a lot more taxidermy coming your way.
Well, I hope you keep shooting stuff, because my kids got to go to school. So
That's right. And I'm going to do it. This will be an audio only too version. This is obviously we're doing video right now, but for people that heard Chad mention his website, it's lazy, the number 8, not the spelled out. So lazy, the number 8.com. And then I think your Instagram is lazy 8, but the I is the number 1, correct? Something like that.
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. My daughter's helped me with the Instagram, so like that's some stuff that I'm learning. I will tell you, we have enough traffic through there that if you just type in Lazy 8 Outfitters or Lazy 8 Taxidermy into Google, it comes right up. It doesn't matter whether you spell it with an 8 or a number. So either
Perfect.
way, it's pretty easy to find.
Perfect. Well, Chad, can't thank you enough for your time tonight. Ton of great tips. And I think, like you said, that'll be good for guys that are getting their taxidermy in for the first time, even experienced people maybe learn something, and hopefully save some taxidermists processing this work a lot of headaches on hatcheted capes and capes that have been out in the sun and the heat for too long.
Oh, I agree. I can't wait this year for February to come and all the Valentines that are going to be coming my way from all the other taxidermists across the country. They're going to be so happy.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, thanks again, Chad.
Thank you.